All right, let's develop these three themes in greater detail here. First, the themes of evolution. As I mentioned, the pragmatist first-generation thinkers are born into a world that is thinking, particularly in the realms of biology, in terms of process, right, in terms of change. And they come to believe that essentially an evolutionary account biologically is the right way to think about these sorts of things. What we know from biological evolution is that species are not fixed. Species are subject to change. Species live in an environment that is itself subject to dramatic changes. As a consequence, those species that are not able to adapt to environmental changes, those ones die out and go extinct. Those that are able to adapt sufficiently to the new environments will stay in existence, but then over time they themselves will change their features in order to maintain, keep in tune rather with the changing environment. So what we have here is an idea of a biological universe in which rather change, right, is fundamental, in which process, right, is more fundamental. There is, in effect, no fixed species. There are no fixed environments, and also evolution is very open-ended. There's no being that is directing the course of evolution. Evolution is not going in any particular direction, trying to achieve any sort of fixed goals, right, and so forth. Now, let's just speak in terms of biological evolution. What the pragmatists will do is say that evolution, philosophically, is not just a biological a theory that best captures the way the world works. That we should generalize evolution to see all of nature, including all of the universe, as subject to an evolutionary process. The whole world, right, is going through this open-ended process of change, development. Some things come into existence, other things go out of existence. The things that exist at this particular point of time and the conditions to which they are subject may be radically different from the kinds of things that exist at this point in time and the kinds of conditions that they are subject to. So what we then have to do is get rid of the idea that there is in any sense an absolute, right, set of conditions. So there are no absolutes, and there is then no fixity, no stasis, right, anything like that. All right, so we think of the world, everything, right, all the way through physics, chemistry, biology, and ourselves as psychological beings as part and parcel of a deep evolutionary process. Now let's turn to the epistemological issues here. There's a correlate here. Just as human beings come to try to know the world, but the world itself is then changing, the consequence of the skepticism is going to be that what we have to do is remain kind of open-minded. Okay? Just as the universe is open-ended, we ourselves have to be open-minded. Rather than thinking in terms of fixed absolutes that hold timelessly, we have to be a bit more tentative and willing to change, right? Our way of thinking about the universe as the universe, right, continues to evolve here. But what also is built into the skepticism here is an idea that our human cognitive powers, right, as formidable as they might be under some circumstances, are not as formidable as the realists would want to make out. While the pragmatists are sympathetic to scientific method, they will argue that scientific method is the best thing that we have going. Nonetheless, scientific method is a highly fallibilistic process that builds all sorts of biases and errors and so forth into it. We try to bracket those things and weed them out, but that process itself is fallible and is never going to be a perfect kind of process. Now, the skepticism, though, we can say first is directed against the idealists. The idealists believe in the religious forms, in various kinds of mystical sources of knowledge. They believe in revelations. Most pragmatists will have nothing to do with that. They'll make the argument that many of the early belief systems, right, were a product of people who were largely illiterate, didn't know very much about the natural world, certainly didn't have anything that we would call science. And so what they called various kinds of revelations from God really were just kind of static pass-me-down representations of their best take on the way the world is. Faith is no better from this perspective. If you're simply taking faith in somebody else's claim to a mystical revelation, well, you certainly don't have anything to go on. There's all kinds of faiths out there. Most of them contradict each other, so faith is completely unreliable as a method of knowledge, and so we should not engage in that. Now, I don't want to overstate that point about faith. There are some pragmatists, perhaps the most famous of them being William James, who does argue that there is a kind of role for faith, and particularly a religious kind of faith. We'll say a little bit more about that a little bit later, but nonetheless, the general tenor of pragmatism epistemologically is to get rid of altogether those traditionally religious emphases on mysticism, revelation, and faith as legitimate sources of knowledge.